Welcome to the XT Podcast, your ultimate destination for valuable insights, practical advice, and inspiring stories that will transform the way you experience business, governance, and life. Join your host, Ashutosh, as he dives deep into three distinct editions: Customer Experience Edition, where industry leaders discuss CX strategies, product brand, employee experience, digital innovations, and best practices for improving customer engagement, retention, and loyalty.
What if cutting 1 million customer calls could save you $7 million and improve your CX scores? In this episode of the XT podcast, I sit down with Jeff Sheehan, former Army helicopter pilot turned CX strategist, now helps telecom, banking, and tech companies slash contact center chaos without slashing customer experience. With 3 decades of service ops leadership and the best-selling CXM field manual to his name, Jeff breaks down a no bullshit data-led methodology that goes beyond NPS and surveys to fix what's actually broken. We talk about why doing CX to customers backfires, the ROI of listening to complaints instead of ignoring them, how cross functional alignment, yes, including marketing, is the real unlock, what not to do when implementing AI in your contact center. If you're tired of vanity metrics and want a CX program that actually moves business levers, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining me at the XT podcast. It means a lot and really appreciate your presence.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's very kind of you. And I've enjoyed all of our chats to get us to this point. So thank you.
Likewise, Jeff. First things first, if you look at the CX landscape today, Jeff, what I see is that on one side, the industries are converging to an extent that the offering in itself isn't a differentiation anymore because all the offerings seem the same. There's sameness to what company A offers and what company B offers and company C offers, irrespective of the industry. And especially the more regulated the industry like banking and telecom, the more this is pronounced, this thing is pronounced. And the tech is no more a differentiator as well because tech is democratized. If you and me, we have the same budgets to spend, you and me would have pretty much the similar tech stack. So tech is no more a differentiator, and that then makes CX more pivotal. So rather than it being more anecdotal and reactive, it's far more pivotal. And I'm very curious to know from you, how do you see this play out in telecom? Do you see this happening in telecom as well? And what is your take on this?
Yeah, in telecom, it's an industry with a lot of capital expense, right? And in the States, there's a lot of telecoms that are sort of I'll call them conventional, the mobile phone, the fixed phone, and so forth. But they're moving into fiber, and enormous capital expense. And then they go into customer acquisition, right? And they have to market, and oftentimes there's a lot of television advertising, very expensive investments in marketing. And then when they get these new customers for their new offerings or their more conventional offerings, they have to try to keep them because one of the problems in the telecom business is churn, right?
Sure.
Because there's so many new incentives. It's almost like marketing is to get the new customer, and you get that promotional pricing that the first 2 years are really inexpensive. And so after that promotional period ends, customers can churn. So because you're surrounded, at least in the United States, you're surrounded by offers from other competitors. So here in the market I live in San Antonio, Texas, Verizon Wireless, T-Mobile Wireless, AT&T Wireless provide home bandwidth. Spectrum, which also provides landline, and Google Fiber is coming in.
Right.
So I have 5 providers for the same service. So the service itself might be commodified. So what's the difference? How do you win me over? How do you keep me as your customer? And that's where the customer experience management focus comes into play. Really, basically, understanding why customers buy, what they value, and what you do that irritates them, right? And with telecom, a common irritant with customers is billing, right? My home security, my mobile phone, my family plan, my internet service, my entertainment package, the Disney Channel and all the sports channels and stuff. And I bought them all with their own separate promotional pricing. And then separately, these promotional prices expire. And I see, maybe my bill is the same for most of the year. And then all of a sudden, it's $20 more expensive. So how do you interact with your customers in a way that doesn't surprise them, doesn't confuse them, doesn't annoy them, and doesn't lose trust? And I think that's so important. And customer experience management is really, in my view, in telecom, customer experience management should be focused on those things, not just the acquisition, but how do you keep the customer in terms of what they value, what irritates them. Uh, I think it's become much more pronounced as a business, as a component of the business strategy than ever before, because of consolidation. Industry consolidation is, is taking place, always has been. Telcos have been swallowing each other up into big entertainment conglomerates and things like that. So yeah, I see CXM as a real frontline defense of business financials, profits, revenues, gross margins. I also see it as a differentiator. How do I convert my marketing offers into real useful, stable relationships with customers? And that's largely the work of a CXM tool.
I cannot agree more, Jeff, and it's very insightful to get deeper inputs about the industry. Thank you, Jeff. On that note, then, Jeff, when you talk about CX being the differentiator, at least in the other industries, what I've seen is that when it comes to CX, there are two approaches. One is solicited feedback, where I proactively reach out to the customers and ask, what is it that you would want me to change for you so that you stay back and don't go? And that's one approach. And the other is where I'm getting this huge tonnage of data from customer complaints and queries and the contact center data. And if you look at the industry, typically it will be 80-20 split or 90-10 split or 95-5 split, where overwhelmingly larger data is from the contact center and a very minuscule data is from solicited input. And despite the two, you would see leaders going by instinct and gut feel about what needs to happen in CX. Do you see this happening in telecom as well? And if so, what we can do to ensure that the actual contact center data is leveraged to transform CX and truly make it differentiated?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's a pivotal question because CX, I'll say, for the last 7, maybe 10 years, has been surveys and scores. We'll send
Right.
out 100 surveys, we'll get 20 responses back. They'll skew a little negative, maybe. It's a lagging indicator. We'll get a score, NPS, customer effort, customer satisfaction, and we'll present slides to a committee every month, and they'll ask, why'd the number go up? Why'd the number go down? And people go, I don't know. We'll have to look into that. But you're always examining the past and trying to understand the past. And the surveys and scores are still important, I think, but at a marketing level, at a higher sort of branding level. And so for me, NPS is useful as an indicator, kind of like the oil pressure gauge in your car. It's kind of useful, right? But how many of us drive with any attention given to the oil pressure, right? We
Nice.
take it for granted, right?
Right.
If it goes way too high and there's smoke coming out of our, the bonnet or the front of the car, yeah, we know we have a problem, but that's all these other symptoms combining at the same time. The gauge was always behind, the lagging behind the actual events going on under the hood, if you don't mind the metaphor there. But to your point, there's a lot more volume of data that's
Right.
in real time. And it's still lagging in the sense that it's not predictive, but it is a bigger volume of data and it's a more reliable set of data and surveys, right? And so that would be in your contact center. And for many telecoms, they record those conversations
Sure.
and convert those conversations, recordings into transcripts and so forth. And that will give you a real sense of why customers are calling you. And I think some of the best telecoms and like Vodafone is a great one. They listen to what the customers are saying as their intent for calling, right?
Nice.
So for many contact centers, they just simply want to manage the volume better, right? And get more efficient at managing the volume. But the very best CX leaders in telecom question the volume and they ask themselves, okay, how much of this do we really need? There must be some of these calls that we're getting, and I'm just picking on calls, but you can say contacts from all the different, omni-channel sources. But we'll just stick with calls for a moment because they're the most expensive. Okay, what percentage of our calls are for things that if we fix them, there'd be no reason for anyone to call. I just think that the surveys and scores, that's never been as reliable as we wanted it to be. And there's this sort of very anecdotal, ghostly connection between NPS and actual quarterly business results. Now, I know
Sure.
people argue with that, there's studies and so forth. But when you talk to CFOs, they're not going to accept your
Sure.
study from 2008 that indicates the possibility that an NPS is this. They want to know how many calls can we avoid and add how many millions to our earnings, or how many millions we can add to our EBITDA, for that quarter. That's where I think CX.
Beautiful. Beautiful, Jeff. When you talk about this, for someone who's not even a telecom expert or telecom veteran, even I feel this is commonsensically a must do, that this is what the businesses should do. This is the commonsensically the must have priority to address. But despite that, it seems what you're suggesting also is that this is not what's happening. There's still a prioritization of surveys and scores and so on. So why is this not being focused on as much as it should be? Where do you see the drift? Where do you see the gap?
Yeah, so you're right. It's not rocket science or brain surgery. In fact, I've been in this customer service business now for over 30 years. I've seen the things that I talk about, decades before in other business operations. Sometimes what's old becomes the new thing, right?
Right.
And that's really what I'm trying to do with my work, is bring this proven methodology that has worked for so long into today's CX practices. But I think there's two things predominantly. One is organizational design. Most companies have silos, right? And
Right.
they're called business units, called P&Ls. In regulated businesses, for example, where I live, there's a company called USAA that's headquartered here, and it's a very big company, I've been a customer with them for a long, long time. But they have life insurance, car insurance, mortgages, banking, home insurance, and they're all separate business units that are regulated a bit differently. I'm
Sure.
not an insurance expert, but when I call USAA to talk about my credit card, and then that is done, and I say, well, I need to talk about my life insurance. But then they have to transfer me to the life insurance business unit.
Right.
And there I have to, again, identify myself and get through the security questions. They're really good. One of the great things about that company, this is not a commercial for USAA, but they do a really good job of recognizing who I am. They don't simply say, well, sorry, I can't help you. You got to call this number. They do transfer me, from one person to another, and they do explain. So it feels like you're being cared for while they're
Right.
also respecting the boundaries of their business. So I think that's a great example of the sort of organizational design that most companies. And then the other thing is, I just think that the business case for CX has to get well beyond the scores, right? And this anecdotal connection between a score and an action. I was just recently a judge in a CX awards program, and one of the participants in that category that I was judging was from a Fortune 10 company, an enormous, very big company, and they process 70 million pieces of customer feedback a year. The scale is incredible. And they have multiple business units, and they are very regulated, different regulators, in fact. And I asked, how do you translate, you don't just democratize data and throw your findings over the wall, the insights for your retail stores or your pharmacies or your whatever. How do you do it? How do you actually show them that if they move a lever, push a button, turn a dial, they'll get better results? And they have governance committees for every business unit. So they distill feedback from customers. They turn it from data to information to insight to something practical that the business unit can do. And then they present that at the governance committee is the conduit. And then once it's done, and it's done as a business case, that might be, if you move the button on your mobile app, you'll get more conversions. There's a store traffic. If you put these things as end displays, they will sell 60% more than wherever you just put them in the store. And so it's very concrete advice that comes from this insight to the business through this governance. And then it's up to the business to execute. But they have a culture of accountability. So if you don't do it, let's say I'm the
Sure.
senior vice president of that business unit, I'm like, okay, thanks, but I have so many things going on. That's not a priority. Okay. And if that results in outcomes are disappointing, let's say, for that business unit, and it could be associated with that activity they didn't perform, there's some accountability there. And it's not like, people get fired or whatever, but it's noticed, it's managed, it's monitored, right? So they have figured out a way as a very large, very complex business organization to collect lots and lots of 70 million bits of customer feedback.
Wow.
And distill it into something very useful, very practical for the business. The business can do, in some cases, stop doing. And that governance translates, it's kind of like, that exchange of oxygen that we have to live, That's what happens in governance. And then it becomes the property and accountability of the business to execute
Beautiful.
the results. So that was a really recent, great example of the mechanics of making CX a practical, I call it a gearbox. And this kind of goes back to that Bain study from, I think, 2008, 2005, where most executives thought they were doing a great job with customer experience, but most of their customers thought they were terrible. They were not satisfied.
Wow.
And it was like an 80-20. 80% of the executives thought they were doing a great job, and 20% of their customers thought they were doing a great job. So the disconnection was really, really. So yeah, I think there is that shift. I think there needs to be that shift, and I think where that shift is taking place, really powerful. It's been really powerful improving the business, and in a mutually aligned way, not just improving profits for the business, but also improving the customer experience, right? And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I don't think
Sure, of course.
the pursuit of being more profitable costs you, like having to be mean to customers, for example. I think you can do both. And the only way to do that is to understand what customers value and what irritates customers and map that to the way you operate. And, you can get a really good portfolio of CX projects from the mapping process that will
Beautiful.
almost instantly, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. You can almost instantly improve things.
Absolutely.
It's like everything else in life, easier said than done. But overall, CX takes years because you're sort of, in some cases, like I asked that big customer, like how long did it take them? How long had they been working on this to sort of go from whatever they had? I'll call it chaos. That's my word before, and then to come up with this very disciplined method and process. And they said, yeah, it took 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought, wow, that makes sense. It's a giant company, 5 years,
Of course.
just to get to where they are. And of course, CX is not a score proposition; it's a continuous improvement proposition.
Sure.
So, time is very, longitudinal time is sort of endless.
Beautiful, Jeff. In the last 5 minutes, you gave so many proof of success of sorts of this approach to CX, which is beyond score chasing and which is the need of the hour, clearly. So thank you. And in your success stories, Jeff, you pretty much conveyed why it is important to focus on what to change, what to listen to, and what to use to drive impact and change. Is there a who to listen to question here as well, in terms of within the contacts that would be reaching out to the brand through the contact center? Is there a way of prioritizing who all are reaching out to me, and of them who are more important or who are valuable contacts that I could get insightful actions from, and leverage all of that to drive impactful change? Is there a way of prioritizing, categorizing valuable contacts?
Yeah, there is, and so in my work, I don't lead with technology. I believe that the focus is purpose, people, process, and then technology. And for me, I'm not a technologist, but I do know this. Oftentimes, for technology, I make sure the customer examines their own inventory, right?
Sure.
It's very often they have what they need. It's features and functionalities of their existing tech investments that they might have to, flip some switches and do some things, but they don't necessarily have to go out and buy a whole new pile of technology. But the narrative in CX is almost always, you got to buy new stuff. You got to buy the magic beans of technology that will solve all the problems. That doesn't work. It quite work that way. So to your question, there is a methodology to examine all of your content volume, calls, emails, complaints, escalations, web chats, mobile app interactions, and all the rest of it. And really understand the intents of your customers. Why are they calling you? And, as I said earlier, with the presumption that some percentage of these contacts, some amount of this volume is unnecessary. So, for example, if I'm calling IKEA because they didn't put enough parts in the box, well, that's a quality assurance problem. So if I have 80,000 calls a year at $3 a call, right? That's a $250,000, if I'm doing my math correctly, of unnecessary calls. If I just add one more quality assurance step before they, when they pack the box somewhere in their process, right? So now I have the parts I need. I don't have to call. It's all there. But that's one example. And we go back to telecom and billing, and roughly 40% of call volume in telecom has to do with billing. And a lot of that, the cause of that, is to do with marketing, right? All these promotional offers. And some telecoms, you might have 300 active promotions going on. And billing systems, they're not the most flexible. They're not just, spreadsheet software. There's they're regulated, right? And they're not quite static, but they're not as dynamic and easily modified as somebody in marketing might want them to be to accommodate all these promotions. So when you get to the root causes of why are they calling so often, and you can really examine the intents and you can follow that to the root causes, you can connect dots that may be counterintuitive. You may not have realized that your promotional offers, there's too many of them, that causes problems for billing, which causes problems for customers, which causes lots of inbound calls, and you can measure the churn. Okay, so for these customer intents around billing, how many are canceling out of frustration because we broke the trust, because we surprised them with something on a bill, right? They didn't warn us. And as I said earlier, some telecoms are very, very creative with their use of their billing. They use it as a means of communication of other things to customers. Hey, did you know the law changed, and now we have to explain this one item, break it down into 3 items. Or did you know we're going to be coming to your neighborhood with our new fiber service, or whatever it might be. But billing, because it touches everybody, every customer, can be a very important and useful conduit to warn or to be part of your change communication. So yeah, there's a methodology, and it's what I call customer contact optimization. 3 phases, we quantify, right? So not just the call volume, but the cost per contact. Sometimes there's a downstream cost, and a great example in telecom would be, truck roll.
Right.
Hey, my router doesn't work. Well, there's the little steps that you're supposed to do yourself. You can turn it off, turn it on. But eventually, you might need someone to dispatch a technician.
Sure.
Very expensive. A truck full of parts. Very expensive. Goes on site. Maybe he's late. Maybe he's on time. Maybe he's early. Right? Where's the communication between me and the customer? Right? If you had to take the day off to be home,
Sure.
to work that day, to wait for your technician, and the window that you were given, your technician doesn't show up in that window, you're calling, right?
Sure.
And because you planned your whole day around that, and so forth. So there's a lot of ways to sort of understand the full quantification of what a call is. It's not just answering the phone as contact. There are other consequences downstream. And then when you sort of go through what I call a strategic action, right? How do we want to best handle this call volume?
Right.
We want to eliminate it because there are things we can eliminate, right? Like that parts example, right? If we do a better QA job, we've eliminated the reason for that call. You can simplify things, and we touched on that a little bit, where you can simplify a process, an application, self-service. You can digitize and use AI, right? And that's another category for treatment. Or you can invest in leverage. There are some conversations that are crucial between the business and the customer. Are crucial for the business, important for the customer, and there's a lot of value in having that conversation. And so once you've treated your intents with these strategic actions, then you pick, the ones that you really want to attack first. And I use the word attack very deliberately because think of it like you're getting rid of a pest, right?
Sure.
The sooner you get rid of that pest, the sooner you can see the results from you getting rid of that pest. So, and that's where the collaboration and the cross-functional collaboration is so important, because those calls might span, because the contact center takes calls from everybody, right? So
of course.
Product, could be a banking product, could be a credit card process, could be a claims process for property and casualty stuff. So you look for the impact, and that's where I think you have to look for that mutual benefit. Okay, so you can say, well, we can reduce call volume, but sometimes when you quantify the contacts, you quantify them, and then you look at them qualitatively, you might realize that a very small amount of your call volume accounts for a high number of detractors.
Sure. Right.
Or that the large number of sort of benign calls adds up to maybe half of your OpEx budget. And
Right.
so, you know what I mean? Like, you start to see relationships that help guide you towards the priorities for what to do first. But it also gives you the source for developing a portfolio, because you're always going to be working on something to affect your interaction with customers. And some are very complicated and they take a lot longer, and some are what you might call quick wins.
Right.
You can do something and move the needle. And in that prioritization process, you have to consider the customer, and you might consider, what do they really value. You might consider, what's really irritating. What are we really hearing about? And that's indexed over to churn or escalations,
Right.
or complaints that go to regulators, and things like that. So back to your question, yes, there's a methodology that I use. It works. It's always worked. It's a very disciplined way to structure the quantification of your contact volume, to have a simple structure for deciding how to treat that contact volume, with strategic action, eliminate it, digitize it, simplify it, or invest in it. And then the root cause analysis and solutioning to get rid of
course,
whatever that. So it's based on this idea that some amount of your call volume is symptoms of things being broken elsewhere.
Right.
And that's not a new thought. That's not a new perspective. But what I like about this methodology is two things mainly. One is, you don't need any new tech.
Right.
If I can arrange, I work with clients and I can arrange, folks around this method, we can get a lot of great stuff done. And the second thing is, it is a teach to fish methodology. In other words, it's designed to transfer knowledge to the client so that they become their new business as usual, right? It can be their structured way of getting past silos,
Sure.
using data that they already have, using customer insight to understand not just how their business is affecting customers, but how it's affecting their own business.
Beautiful.
And all these good things that are real disciplines of customer experience management. So yeah, there's a way to use that incredible asset of your data, your contact center, and elsewhere. Use the people to get, cross-functional collaboration to get beyond silos and P&Ls and stuff.
Fantastic. So I totally love it, Jeff. In fact, what I loved about the method is that there's a process which is backed by data, which is backed by the data that's already residing in the company, rather than something that needs to be sought out. This is something that you have already got and you're making sense of it right away. Can you give us an example, Jeff, of a company, whether you name it or not, but an example where with this method you managed to reduce a certain amount of contact volume, possibly improved service quality, which resulted in a dollar impact, an ROI impact? Would you mind just taking us through an example, because that will just then help us concretize the understanding of not just the method but also the impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't name names, but
Sure.
best client worked with last year, and National Telco. They offered home security, mobile, fixed entertainment, home internet. The sort of normal portfolio of offerings from the telecom, and they had said to themselves, we have too much call volume. It's costing us a lot of money. Eliminate so much call volume, and we need to save so much in OpEx, while at the same time preserving customer satisfaction and other CX metrics. And that was their objective. They were given that as a business objective. And so their initial thought, after they measured a lot of their own internal call metrics, was to use technology to digitally contain or digitally deflect customer calls. And so they bought a lot of stuff. They implemented a lot of stuff. They didn't communicate that so well to their customer base.
Right.
And they turned it on. And what do you think happened?
A lot of calls, more calls.
A lot more calls, and they got a little more, I'll say, hostile or upset, because
Gosh.
these guys thought, technology was the magic beans, and I love that expression. But that technology was going to just, digitally contain customers like they don't have a choice. And that's what I call doing CX to your customers, not for your customers.
Nice.
And it didn't pay off. But what was worse was because they had designed this whole financial model around digitally deflecting, and they had an ROI with the vendor, for what that product, what the technology was going to do. They took out budget from the contact center and to use it elsewhere. They even reduced headcount in the contact center, right? They sort of took the dividend out before the solution was even turned on. They had real confidence in their plan, but then they flipped on the solution and it backfired. There were more calls than before. They were less. Customers were not happy. That was the general prevailing sentiment around that. And so now they were really in trouble because they had already taken out the budget and the headcount. So they needed some new way. So the customer contact optimization method was applied, and they had heard of it before because it's out there. It's not new. I didn't invent it, but they tried to do it themselves. They had a good understanding of the method, but the big challenges are oftentimes the invisible. They were the organizational issues that we talked about earlier. The business units, the P&Ls, the different perspectives, right? My data, I don't trust your data. I don't believe your data. I don't think you have enough data. So there's always some way to sort of start getting on board with what needs to be done. So we applied the methodology to this client, and we did the quantification. That revealed a lot of eye-opening stuff. For example, there were some small volumes of calls that were really driving NPS detractors. There was another volume of calls that were very expensive. Even if the volume wasn't that large, they were very expensive problems to solve, and they required truck rolls or whole unit swaps of premise equipment and things like that. Like really expensive treatment for that volume. And all these other things were discovered. And so then we went through the workshop to decide cross-functionally. And we had people from billing, marketing, field services, the contact center, and we had people from managers up to executive vice presidents in this workshop.
Wow.
We were looking at that quantified call volume and putting it through the strategic action matrix, right? Would you eliminate, simplify, and so on. And what was great about that is, you had real experts who understood some things in detail. And then you had other folks that were sort of more broadly managing, things. And so you had this really interesting conversation. And for me as a consultant, I was very proud of the fact that we were bringing people together in that business.
Right.
Like the billing and marketing folks never talked. And billing, marketing, and contact center never talked.
Gosh.
And they were in the room and they were looking at a set of their data.
Nice.
Generating their systems and their people, and really having a lot of confidence in it because there's a great volume of that data. 200,000 calls were examined. That's a very reliable body of data to be confident with. And so that exercise happened, and from there, a small set of intents were chosen to move to the next phase, which is the resolution phase, which involves root cause analysis and then solutioning. And at root cause analysis, you keep things very simple. Use the 5 whys, develop a fishbone diagram, right? So you have a really easy method anyone can use to challenge and get to the real kernel. And then a really easy method to visually capture the root cause analysis. And then you stay away from solutioning, right? Everybody wants to fix it before they understand it. So you have to really be disciplined about that. And then you give it over to the solution team, which are really those subject matter experts. Like if there's a billing issue, you've got billing people that know the system that they're working in. They'll tell you that there's an IT limitation or regulatory requirement or a particular platform they're using won't let them do something, whatever. And then it goes back, so the action's taken, and then it goes back to the front of the method to measure the impact. And you do that by monitoring the intents and what customers are saying and that sort of stuff. So we worked with that customer for most of a year. Within 6 months, they had saved $7 million and had removed over 1 million contacts. They had 1 million fewer inbound contacts that saved 7 million, and they were well on their way to meeting that objective.
Beautiful.
budget reduction. They also had an uptick in their customer experience metrics around NPS, CSAT, CES.
Nice.
And I think most importantly, they had a really good understanding of where they got in their own way, as a
Right.
business. And oftentimes things are at cross purposes quite by accident. It might be a tech debt. It might be processes that haven't been challenged in years. And when you really examine it, you're like, why do we do this anymore? Let's get rid of it. And but it requires somebody to really discover that and dig deep into it and then say, well, let's challenge that. And as I say, everything's easier said than done. They were full on running that methodology as a continuous improvement program, which is to me the real win.
Absolutely.
You can tie your kids' shoes when they're little, or you can teach them to tie their shoes, which is not that easy to do.
Correct. Absolutely.
But once they know how to do it, they own that. And,
Right.
So that was a real example. One of the things that did happen was we discovered that marketing had about 300 promotional offers, and we said you should aim for 80, not 300. You should about 80. And marketing flipped out because marketing saw themselves as the engine for growth for the telecom.
Right.
And I believe they are, but that was a sacred cow that we were not going to go from 300 to 80. But when we showed them connections between the promotional offers, the billing, and the contact volume, and the savings, and the overall health of the company, when we showed them that big picture in its fullest context, that was what compelled them to re-examine promotional offers, right? So that's a cultural thing, which is, as you know, right, those are probably the most challenging, the biggest challenges or the toughest challenges to affect. But it was only because we had a comprehensive program, we had real data from their business, and we were connecting it to the root causes that we were able to convince the marketing folks. As one example, having fewer promotional offers was healthier for the business.
Quite counterintuitive, right? Beautiful, beautiful, Jeff. In fact, that brings me to this question that you referred to so many projects that came out of your methodology and the structured approach that you deployed that gave you contact volume versus the triggers for that volume and therefore what to prioritize and so on. I have a question around how do you recommend the prioritization of the projects within the resolution phase when you get to know certain actions need to be taken to resolve certain volume? How do you prioritize which of the projects to focus on?
What we do is we guide the customer to that conversation. As a consultant, I wouldn't prioritize. I would have my own opinions about that. What you want the customer to do is make those decisions for themselves because they're now invested as opposed to being advised on what to do. And what we do is advise on the process, right? So when we get to that strategic action phase 2, so we've quantified intents, we've examined the intents through this very simple process of elimination, simplification, digitize, or AI, and leverage, invest. It's after that work that the prioritization is done. And it's always a combination of what do customers value, what does the business value, what irritates customers and what irritates the business. And that is a combination of soft and hard, factors, I'll call it. So you're going to definitely have money involved in that. And sometimes it is counterintuitive where it may not be the most expensive one, but it's the one that really pisses customers off, right? And if you're monitoring social media, you'll see that, right? Or maybe there's complaints to the regulatory agency, right? And you've got all that information. And so it becomes a matter of all these other factors. And then it's a judgment decision by the leadership. And so with this one example I gave you earlier, we coached the customer. They came up with their list of priorities with the executive committee because we have strong governance in this methodology, right? So you've got tactical governance for day-to-day work. You've got mid-management government for the directors and VPs who run the departments that are involved. And then you have that senior leadership team governance, executive committee kind of folks who looked at the priorities that were initially developed and said, well, no, we want this one over that one and so forth. And then they sanctioned the top 2 intents that would go forward to the resolution phase, which is that root cause analysis. And the reason for that was, with them, it had to do more with what was irritating the customers and what they were hearing really loudly from the customers. And then, of course, there was always a business impact, because if you're not dealing with escalations,
Sure.
you're not dealing with complaints and so forth, you are saving time. But they also understood that it's a continuous improvement. This was, okay, we'll do these two first. We'll learn the methodology, and then we'll get on 3, 4, 5, etc. As part of our new internal process for quality and managing the customer experience. So I don't know, listen to my answer to your question. It's like, there's no magic to it. It's a judgment. It's a discretion. But what's great is it's a collaborative effort in that workshop, which is the second phase, right? And you've got billing, marketing, operations, contact center. You've got all these different people with their perspectives on that issue, adding their 2 cents, and they're seeing the data, right? So they're not seeing the data keeps people from defending their domain, right?
Of course.
Because sometimes they want to do that, and you're like, yeah, but it's really causing a lot of pain. So
Absolutely.
and so that's really where that best stuff happens. So when they do come up with a list of priorities, it does go through governance, and other things get applied there as well, other judgments, and so then it's a decision. But it's a decision that's well understood by
Of
the folks
course.
that execute on that work. So much of CX change fails because they don't have the investment of the stakeholder.
Absolutely.
And so this method, is very conscious of that, and that collaboration in that second phase. It's probably more important to breach the cultural inertia, if not resistance, than it is at any sort of technical stuff. The data really lays that out pretty clear.
Absolutely.
And so then it becomes a leadership judgment on, okay, what are we going to knock out first?
I'm quite curious though, Jeff, that your methodology seems to be so data driven, and rightfully so. You pointed out that helps you address all these individual biases, predispositions, roles, and avatars that we wear. That I'm from marketing, we are supposed to bring in as many promotional strategies as we can, and you're asking is to reduce. Data proves this. So there's a way of aligning, collaborating, focusing on the right next step forward. I'm curious, have you observed any blind spots, blind spots which, despite the data, they occur and they impact the CX program, despite the methodology that you have, despite the structured approach that you run with, and the data centric processes that you have? Do you still encounter certain blind spots, and what are those blind spots which you would advise CX leaders to avoid if they want the CX programs to run successfully?
That's a great question. I'm thinking about an example. I think there was one project with a client. We experienced a blind spot where in the quantification phase, we were collecting, basically we created a big spreadsheet with the customer intents, the volume, costs, downstream costs, KPI metrics, CX. So you can look at each intent in sort of its full, in all the ways it's measured. But they didn't share all the information with us. So we built a table that was incomplete and we didn't know about it. And I think it was just some proprietary. I think they just didn't want to be fully disclosed to us. And so they kind of withheld some things around cost data, for example.
Sure.
But we didn't learn that until later when one of the executives showed us a spreadsheet where they had all their cost per contact.
Oh.
And we had been stuck on that, getting that for some time. But unbeknownst to us as consultants, it was just information they weren't comfortable sharing with us.
Sure.
And of course, we had all the non-disclosure and all the right proprietary, or we were not at risk in any way. But that kind of, in later stages of the program that we were delivering, it did affect decision making. Like if you're not fully clear and accurate with costs, you can make some of the wrong recommendations.
Of course.
Because the real data wasn't given. But in terms of discovering things, if blind spots is going back to counterintuitive, we see things we didn't know. That happens all the time. Just that careful, methodical examination of your own data, your own business. And as I said, 40% of their calls were related to billing, and we understood billing intents, and that guided us to lots of great chats with billing and with call center agents around billing, because there were some real limitations to their tool sets. Some agents had access to billing tools, some did not. And you can appreciate as a customer, like if you get somebody on the phone who can't help you see your bill, and you've got to call back or you've got to go on hold. So it affected all these other things. And then that person gets a survey, right? Or they opt for the survey after the
Of
call.
course.
So a lot of things do sort of surprise folks because they're counterintuitive. They just do not respect the connection between marketing offers and inbound calls. So yeah, I would say those are the surprises.
Wonderful. Jeff, I cannot help but ask this question to you because today we live in a world which jargonizes AI and Gen AI and automation and so on. And right at the start of this conversation, you mentioned how your methodology is process centric, people centric, and tech is important, but it's at the end, it's at the last. What would be your one piece of advice for CX leaders in general, who are built into the.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And what we see more and more of in white papers and other publications is the very tight use case for AI in a contact center. That, there's the hyperbole of the vendors, right, who say AI is going to, make, again, magic beans, that AI is going to make everything automatic and robotic and improve quality and it's going to do all this amazing stuff. But the use cases that I'm reading about are very small, very focused, very well, carefully thought out, and the outcomes are probably most of what that thought is given to. So that, the folks who are succeeding with AI in contact center know what they want to achieve first, and then they go back and figure out how to do that. And as I said in that example, earlier, that this company, National Telco, they implemented technology for themselves to get a cost savings and a labor savings and efficiencies just from technology, and it was rejected by the customers. Right? It wasn't designed, it wasn't implemented for customers, done to customers to benefit the business.
Nice.
And I think that really burned a lesson in my brain. So one of the things about this customer contact optimization methodology is you go through that second phase of strategic action and you really look at the intents and say, okay, what can we eliminate? What can we digitize and use AI on? And with those intents, you can pick one or two and really examine what you want the outcomes to be, right? And it might be self-service, right? Or FAQs that are dynamically updated and, with customer feedback, that thumb up, thumb down feedback, sometimes you sometimes see, or that, typical contact center, we have level one problems where we have known problems and known solutions. How is that managed in our knowledge base? And then we have level two problems, unknown problems with unknown solutions. We solve those. How is that knowledge packaged and presented? So, and we saw that, for example, with a big technology company. They're a software as a service company you would know the name of. And they realized that most of their customers were B2B. Their biggest customers were business-to-business customers.
Sure.
They do have B2C customer base as well. But the B2B customers were like technical experts, right? So I'm working at a company as the IT guy. The people I serve, my customers, are the folks who work at my company, and they're asking me questions. And now I, as an IT guy, have to go to this vendor and put in a ticket and place a call. And oftentimes I'm talking to that level one agent that doesn't know the answer. I got to get to that level two or level three person, talk to the person who can help me. And that really frustrated their B2B customers. So they reimagined their knowledge management and how they served their B2B customers to
Right.
get the best, most updated, dynamic knowledge base. And when they did that, they improved their customer satisfaction immediately. They saved a
Nice.
huge amount of money. They had to make investments to get that knowledge management.
Sure.
They bought some tools and things like that, but they really made an effort to say, okay, they don't want to call us. We don't want to take their call. They don't want to call us. Let's give them what they're asking for in terms of a knowledge base. And they reduced their call volume from their B2B customers by half, saved millions, spent a few dollars to have a new process. And it's, again, a continuous improvement process. As products shift, and we're always inventing and deploying new products and capabilities and updates and things, that knowledge makes its way into the knowledge management system and what the B2B customers can access. So they really applied that digitized AI, in a very careful use case that served customers and their business. And it was I heard the story from their strategic finance guy and their VP of CX. And it was the story told by a strategic finance guy from the business.
Wow.
Not the CFO,
Sure.
but he was the CFO, right? And so when you have a finance guy talking about CX,
Absolutely.
so it was an amazing story of win-win, right? And I think to
Beautiful.
your question, for the methodology to point out the intents that are maybe most suited for AI applications, really look at the outcome. What are you trying to do? Is it around self-service? Is it around, and what exactly? Maybe it's for one product. Maybe it's for a process or helping automate a warranty or a scheduling or callback. I don't know what, but it's really a use case for AI using this methodology is found in that strategic action phase. And that really does guide customers into the things that customers will adopt. The worst case scenario is you spend all this money, you make all this effort, you do this thing, customers say, I'm not doing that. And so that's what we pitch is in the strategic actions that when you do digitize, it's not purely for internal reasons. It's for doing something the customer values. Because if they value it, they'll adopt it. Right?
Sure.
Now, my 85-year-old mother isn't going to adopt, a process on her phone. Probably she doesn't even use her phone for bank. She'll go to the branch and do bank. But for a
Absolutely.
telecom, she will call and have a lengthy conversations. I got my chattiness from my spouse.
No, perfect.
The use case for AI has to be very specific, and the way the methodology helps you do that is like guiding you through this matrix of decisions that
Right.
you find the right intents for AI.
Fantastic. Jeff, this has been fascinating, extremely insightful. I really love the structured methodology and approach you have to contact center optimization. If anyone from my audience has to reach out to you for getting to know about your methodology, possibly collaborate with you, work with you, how can they reach out to you? Where all can they reach out to you and get to work with you?
Yeah, so the best way to do that is LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile is open. You can reach me anywhere in the world. And then from there, you can get to my website. I actually have a 7-part series on the customer contact optimization methodology. So if you want to sign up for that and you can see how it works, what it does, and do that by way of my LinkedIn profile. But LinkedIn is absolutely the easiest way to find me and
Fantastic. I mean, to all the listeners and viewers, I will be sharing the link to Jeff's profile on the description of the video. So please feel free to reach out and connect. And thank you so much once again, Jeff, for this wonderful, insightful episode. Really appreciate it. There have been some follow up questions which came out of your answers. And for that, probably we'll have to have a next episode. So I will reach out to you for another one. But till then, thank you so much and really appreciate your time here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate that, and I hope that anything I've shared, is relevant or interesting or even important to your listeners. And I would absolutely love to engage and talk to whomever is interested in having a question answered or having a chat. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.